They looked me in the eye and said to figure it out myself while handing my sister a blank check. I vanished like a deleted file, taking only a suitcase and a vow never to beg again. 9 years later, I walked into her wedding, and my mother insulted me loud enough for strangers to hear. The groom went pale, looking at me like an exposed secret. In that second, their perfect family portrait finally shattered. My name is Violet Fisher. For the last 9 years, that name has meant absolutely nothing to the people in this room, and I preferred it that way. I was 26 years old, standing in the opulent, humidity-drenched foyer of the Oglethorpe Hotel in Savannah, Georgia, wearing a dress that cost more than my first car. I was not here as a daughter. I was not here as a sister. I was simply a +1, a polite shadow attached to the arm of Dr. Rowan Hale. Rowan squeezed my hand, her thumb brushing against my knuckles in a steady rhythm. She was the invited guest, a respected neurologist in the same medical network as the groom's father. I was just her wife, the quiet woman with the sharp eyes whom nobody here recognized. That was the point. I had spent nearly a decade scrubbing myself from their narrative, building a life so distinct and fortified that I no longer resembled the terrified teenager they had discarded in Pennsylvania. The air in the hotel smelled of jasmine and expensive champagne. It was a smell that tried too hard to mask the underlying scent of the Savannah River mud. Much like this wedding was trying to mask the rot at the center of my family. I checked my watch. We had been here for exactly 12 minutes. My plan was precise. We would enter the reception hall, find our table, offer polite nods during the speeches, eat the overpriced sea bass, and leave before the cake was cut. I did not want a scene. I did not want a reunion. I wanted to prove to myself that I could walk through fire and not feel the heat. We moved away from the entrance, heading down the long, carpeted corridor that led to the grand ballroom. The walls were lined with mirrors, reflecting the guests in their tuxedos and gowns. I caught a glimpse of myself. My posture was straight, my expression neutral. I looked nothing like the girl who used to hunch her shoulders to take up less space. I was a forensic financial analyst now. My entire career was built on finding the discrepancies in perfect columns of numbers, spotting the lies that people buried in ledgers. I knew how to keep my face still while looking at a disaster. Then I heard it. The voice was unmistakable. It cut through the ambient chatter of 50 other guests like a serrated knife. It was a voice that used to dictate my reality, a voice that could make me feel small without raising a decibel. She would not dare show her face here unless she wants to be humiliated again. I froze, just for a fraction of a second. Rowan felt the tension in my arm and stopped. Turning her head slightly, we were standing near a large arrangement of white hydrangeas, partially obscured from the main flow of traffic, but sound traveled easily in the high-ceilinged hallway. My mother, Marianne Fisher, was standing 10 feet away. She was speaking to an older woman I did not recognize, likely a relative of the groom. Marianne looked impeccable in a navy blue silk gown, her hair coiffed into a stiff, immovable helmet of blonde. She looked wealthy. She looked kind. That was her greatest trick. I should have kept walking. The logical part of my brain, the part that ran risk assessments for Fortune 500 companies, told me to pivot and walk out the front door. But before I could move, the crowd shifted. Sloane appeared, my sister, the bride. She was a vision in white lace, a dress that I instantly calculated probably cost around $8,000. She was laughing at something the photographer said, her head thrown back, radiating the specific, blinding confidence of someone who has never been told no. Then her gaze swept the corridor. Her eyes landed on me. The laughter died in her throat so abruptly, it was as if someone had cut a power cord. Her smile vanished, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated horror. It was not the horror of seeing a ghost. It was the horror of seeing a stain on a pristine tablecloth. Sloane marched toward me. She did not glide. She marched. Her heels clicked aggressively against the marble floor. The sound drew attention. Heads turned. The polite murmur of conversation in the hallway dipped, then ceased entirely. "What are you doing here?" Sloane hissed. She stopped 2 feet from me, her chest heaving, You were not invited. I kept my voice low, modulated, the same tone I used when explaining to a CEO that his CFO was embezzling funds. I am here as a guest of Dr. Hale. We are on the list. You are here to ruin this, Sloane said, her voice rising in pitch. She looked around, playing to the gathering audience. She is here to crash my wedding. She is obsessed with me. Marianne was beside her in an instant. My mother did not look at Rowan. She did not look at the security guard hovering by the door. She looked only at me, her eyes narrowing into slits of cold disappointment. Violet, Marianne said. The way she said my name made it sound like a diagnosis. Leave, now, before you embarrass yourself. I am not embarrassed, I said. My heart was hammering against my ribs, but my hands were steady. I kept them clasped loosely in front of me. I am just attending a wedding. Marianne, there is no scene here unless you make one. That was the wrong thing to say. Or perhaps, for them, it was exactly the right thing. It gave them permission. Marianne stepped forward and grabbed my wrist. Her grip was shocking in its ferocity. Her nails dug into the soft skin of my inner arm, sharp and painful. It was a physical violation that snapped me back 9 years, to a kitchen where I was told I was too expensive to keep. You were always the spare, Marianne whispered, but in the sudden silence of the corridor, it carried like a shout. You are not family. You are the part we cut off to save the rest. Get out. The guests were watching. I could feel their eyes. There were at least 20 people standing in the hallway, clutching their champagne flutes, pretending to look away while absorbing every syllable. In Savannah society, gossip was a currency more valuable than gold, and my mother had just handed them a fortune. I looked down at my mother's hand on my wrist. I did not pull away. I did not flinch. I let her hold on to me, let her display her aggression for everyone to see. I slowly raised my eyes to meet hers. Please let go of my arm, I said. I did not shout. I did not plead. I spoke with the absolute terrifying calm of someone who holds all the cards. You are hurting me, and people are watching. Marianne realized her mistake a second too late. She saw the guests staring. She saw the judgment in the eyes of the groom's aunt. She snatched her hand back as if I had burned her, smoothing her dress, instantly trying to pivot back to the victim role. She is mentally unstable, Marianne announced to the room at large, her voice trembling with a fake performative grief. We have tried to help her for years. She just shows up to torment poor Sloane. Rowan stepped forward, placing her body slightly in front of mine. It was a protective shield, a reminder that I was not alone this time. Mrs. Fisher, Rowan said, her voice clipped and professional. Violet is my wife. We are invited guests. If you continue to assault her, we will have a problem that goes beyond a wedding crash. Sloane let out a screech of frustration. I do not care who she is with. I want her gone. Where is Graham? She spun around, scanning the crowd, her veil whipping around her face. Graham, get out here. The desperation in her voice was pathetic. She needed a champion. She needed a man to step in and validate her reality, to tell me that I was the villain she needed me to be. The double doors to the groom's suite opened. Graham Kessler stepped out. I had never met Graham. I had only seen his face in the engagement photos Sloane posted incessantly on social media and in the professional dossiers I reviewed at work. He was a handsome man in that generic, well-fed way sandy hair, a jawline that suggested money, and a tuxedo that fit perfectly. He looked annoyed at being summoned, adjusting his cufflinks as he walked toward the commotion. Sloane, honey, what is going on? Graham asked. He had a drink in his hand. He looked like a man who just wanted to get to the open bar. Sloane rushed to him, grabbing his lapels. It is her. It is Violet. She is here to destroy everything. Make her leave. Graham, tell security to throw her out. Graham blinked, looking confused. Violet, your sister. She is not my sister, Sloane screamed. She is a stalker. Look at her. Graham turned. He looked past Sloane's heaving shoulders. He looked past Marianne's stony glare. He looked past Rowan. He looked at me. I stood perfectly still. I did not smile. I did not frown. I just watched him with the neutral, analytical gaze of a senior compliance auditor who has just found a discrepancy in the books. The color drained from Graham Kessler's face so fast, it was almost impressive. It started at his neck and washed up to his hairline, leaving him a sickly, ash-gray color. His mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. The glass in his hand tilted dangerously. He did not look like a groom seeing an unwanted in-law. He looked like a man who had just seen the Grim Reaper standing in the hallway of the Oglethorpe Hotel. He knew me. Not as Violet Fisher, the estranged sister. He knew me as V. Fisher, the signature at the bottom of the compliance inquiry that had landed on his desk 3 weeks ago. He knew me as the lead analyst from Luminart Compliance Group who had flagged a series of irregularities in his family company's supply chain payments. Sloane did not see his face. She was too busy glaring at me. "Well," she demanded, shaking his arm. "Tell her. Graham, tell her she is trash." Graham did not speak. He could not. He was staring at me with the wide, terrified eyes of an animal caught in headlights. He was realizing that the failure sister, the burden his fiancée had complained about, the dropout his mother-in-law had mocked, was actually the woman holding the scalpel that was currently hovering over his career. I tilted my head to the side, just a fraction of an inch. "Hello? Graham?" I said. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bones. The guests waited for him to yell. They waited for him to defend his bride. Instead, Graham swallowed hard. His Adam's apple bobbed in his throat. He looked at Sloane, then back at me, his eyes darting to the guests. Realizing the trap he was in, if he kicked me out, he risked escalating a situation with the woman investigating his finances. If he let me stay, he betrayed his wife, but fear is a powerful motivator. And Graham Kessler looked absolutely terrified. "Violet," he choked out. His voice was a rasp. "I did not know you were family." Sloane froze. She pulled back from him, her brow furrowing. "What?" Marianne stepped in, sensing the shift in power but not understanding the source. "Graham, darling, do not let her manipulate you. She is lying. She probably forged an invitation." "She is with Dr. Hale," Graham said, his voice gaining a frantic edge. He looked at Rowan, nodding excessively. "Dr. Hale is a valued guest. We cannot just kick out a guest." Sloane looked at him as if he had slapped her. "Are you kidding me? She is ruining my day." "We can discuss this later," Graham said, his eyes pleading with me to remain silent. He was begging. Without saying a word, he was begging me not to say what I did for a living. "Everyone, please, let us go inside. The reception is starting." He tried to usher Sloane toward the ballroom doors, but she dug her heels in. The narrative was breaking. The script they had written for me, the unstable. Jealous failure was not working, and they did not know why. "I am not going in there with her." Sloane pointed a manicured finger at my face. "Then we will wait," I said calmly. Marianne glared at me with pure hatred. "You think you have won something, you are still nothing. Violet, you are just a bitter girl who could not make it on her own." I almost laughed. The irony was so rich I could taste it. "Actually," I said, my voice smooth and carrying clearly to the gathered crowd, "I think I will go find my table. I believe I am seated near the back, far away from the head table. Is that correct?" "Graham." Graham flinched at the sound of his name. Yes, that is fine. Please, go ahead." I took Rowan's arm. We stepped forward. Marianne and Sloane had to physically move out of our way or be run over. Marianne looked like she wanted to strike me again, but the memory of the audience held her back. Sloane was staring at her new husband with a dawning, terrifying realization that he was hiding something. As we passed Graham, I paused. I did not look at my mother or my sister. I looked only at him. "Congratulations," I said softly. "I look forward to catching up." He looked like he was going to be sick. We walked past them, through the double doors and into the ballroom. Behind us, the whispers exploded. The facade of the perfect family had not just cracked, it had been smashed open with a hammer. And the best part was, I had not even raised my voice. I felt Rowan's hand tighten on mine. "Are you okay?" she whispered. "I am fine," I answered, and for the first time in 9 years, regarding this family, I meant it 100%. The air in the ballroom was cool, but the atmosphere behind us was burning. I had come here to be a ghost. But it seemed Graham Kessler had just realized that ghosts are the most dangerous things of all, because you cannot kill something that is already dead to you. You can only wait for it to haunt you, and the haunting had just begun. To understand why I stood in that hotel hallway with ice in my veins, you have to understand the mathematics of my childhood. Before I was a forensic accountant, before I learned how to track embezzlement and hide assets, I learned that love in the Fisher household was a finite currency, and the exchange rate was rigged. It was 9 years ago in Briar Glen, Pennsylvania. Briar Glen was one of those suffocating towns where everyone knew your last name before they knew your first. It was the sort of place that trapped you in amber if you stayed too long after graduation. I was 17 years old, sitting at our scratched oak kitchen table. My hands folded over a manila folder containing my acceptance letter to the local community college and a breakdown of the tuition costs. I had prepared for this conversation like a board meeting. I had calculated the cost per credit hour. I had outlined a part-time work schedule to cover my books and transportation. I was asking for the bare minimum. I needed help with the tuition for the first 2 semesters until I could qualify for more aid or save enough from a summer job. My father, Calvin Fisher, did not even open the folder. He sat there with his morning coffee, the steam rising in the cold kitchen air, looking at me with a detached amusement. My mother, Mary Ann, was at the sink, scrubbing a pot that was already clean. Her back was to me, a wall of silence I had spent my entire life trying to climb. "You are almost 18. "Violet," my father said, his voice level and reasonable, the voice of a man teaching a hard but necessary lesson. "In this family, we believe in independence. If you want this education, you need to earn it. Handouts make people weak." I remember nodding. It sounded logical. It sounded like the Protestant work ethic that Briar Glen was built on. I felt a flush of shame for even asking. I told him I understood. I told him I would figure it out. I stood up, took my folder, and walked out of the kitchen feeling like a beggar who had been rightfully turned away from the feast. 3 days later, I came home early from school because I had a migraine. The house was quiet. I walked into the kitchen to get a glass of water and saw the checkbook lying open on the counter. My father was meticulous about money, or so I thought. He never left financial documents out. Curiosity is a dangerous thing, but desperation is worse. I looked at the ledger. The ink was fresh. There was a check written that morning. The recipient was the admissions office of a private liberal arts college 3 hours away. The amount was $14,000. In the memo line, written in my mother's looping, elegant cursive, were the words, "Sloan, housing and tuition deposit." Below that was another check for $2,000 to a private tutoring service for SAT prep. Below that, $500 for a wardrobe consultation. I stood there, gripping the edge of the counter until my knuckles turned white. My sister, Sloan, was a year younger than me. She had a lower GPA. She had no job. She had never cleaned a bathroom or cooked a meal in her life. Yet, for her, the checkbook was not just open. It was a floodgate. Sloan was the investment. I was the expense. That was the day the illusion of fairness died. I realized then that the independence speech was not a philosophy. It was a targeted weapon. It was designed to keep me down while lifting her up. I did not confront them. I knew, with a terrifying clarity, that screaming would achieve nothing. Instead, I went to work. I picked up shifts at the local grocery store, stocking shelves until my back seized up. I took weekend shifts at a diner on the highway. pouring coffee for truckers who tipped in loose change. I worked 30 hours a week on top of my high school course load. But the cruelty was not just in the denial of support, it was in the extraction. At the end of that month, my father knocked on my bedroom door. He did not ask how school was. He did not ask why I looked so tired that I had dark circles under my eyes. He held out his hand. "We need to discuss your contribution," he said. "You are earning money now. You are using our electricity, our water, our food. It is time you paid rent." Rent. I was 17. I was a minor. But he was serious. He demanded 30% of my paycheck. He called it a lesson in the real world. I watched him take the cash money I had saved for textbooks and put it into his wallet. Later that week, I saw Sloan wearing a new designer jacket. I did not need a calculator to know where the money for that jacket had come from. It was psychological warfare. They were draining my resources to ensure I could never leave. While pouring resources into Sloan to ensure she could fly, that was when I started recording them. I did not buy a fancy spy recorder. I used an old, cracked smartphone I had bought secondhand from a friend. I kept it in my pocket, the screen facing out, the voice memo app running whenever I entered a room with them. I did not do it for revenge, not then. I did it because they were masters of gaslighting. They would say something cruel, something that cut me to the bone. And an hour later they would deny it with such conviction that I began to question my own sanity. I remember one dinner vividly. Sloan was complaining about the color of the car they had bought her, a used but reliable sedan. She wanted a convertible. My mother laughed. A tinkling, indulgent sound. "Oh, stop it," Marianne said, reaching over to pat Sloan's hand. "You deserve the best. Sweetie, we just have to move some funds around." I looked up from my plate. I had just paid my father $200 in rent that morning. "What about my tuition?" I asked. "The deadline is next week. If I do not pay the deposit, I lose my spot." My mother stopped smiling. She looked at me with cold, dead eyes. "We never agreed to help you with that. Violet, why are you always making things up? You are so dramatic. We told you months ago you were on your own." I touched the phone in my pocket. I felt the heat of the battery against my thigh. I knew I had the recording of them discussing the budget, discussing how they could squeeze me to pay for Sloan's extras. Having that recording did not get me the money, but it saved my mind. It proved I was not crazy. It proved they were liars. The breaking point came in August. The humidity in Pennsylvania was thick enough to chew on. I had managed to scrape together enough for one semester at the community college, but only if I did not eat lunch and walk to campus instead of taking the bus. I came home from a double shift at the diner, smelling of grease and burnt coffee. My room had been tossed. My drawers were open. My mattress was askew. My cash box was gone. It was a small metal tin where I kept my tips. It had about $600 in it. My emergency fund, my lifeline. I walked downstairs. The family was watching television. Sloan was painting her toenails on the coffee table. "Where is it?" I asked. My father did not look away from the screen. "We needed to borrow it," he said casually. "Sloan's laptop crashed. She needs a MacBook for college. You know how expensive those are. We will pay you back when we can." They would never pay me back. I knew it. They knew it. They had stolen my survival money to buy a luxury item for the golden child, and they expected me to swallow it. That night, I did not sleep. I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling, listening to the house settle. I realized that if I stayed, I would die. Not physically, perhaps, but the person I could be, the smart, capable, ambitious woman I felt growing inside me, would be strangled in the crib. They would feed on me until there was nothing left but a husk. I made a decision. It was not emotional. It was a forensic audit of my life. The liabilities outweighed the assets. It was time to liquidate and close the account. I waited until 3 a.m. I packed one suitcase. I did not take any clothes that they had bought me, which wasn't hard because they hadn't bought me clothes in 2 years. I took my work uniforms. I took my sturdy shoes. I took my birth certificate, my social security card, and my passport, which I had stolen from my father's safe 2 days prior, because I had sensed the wind changing, and I took the ledger. It was a black composition notebook where I had tracked every penny I earned, every penny they took, every discrepancy between what they gave Sloan and what they denied me. It was a crude version of the work I would do later in life. It was my first audit. I walked 3 miles in the dark to the edge of town. There was an old man named Derek Morrow who lived in a trailer park near the interstate. He was my grandmother's cousin, a man the family pretended did not exist because he had a past with alcohol and gambling. But he had always been kind to me. He was the only one who ever looked at me and saw a person, not a utility. I knocked on his metal door as the sun was beginning to bleed gray into the sky. Derek opened it, wearing a stained undershirt, his eyes bleary. He looked at my suitcase. He looked at my face. He did not ask stupid questions. He stepped back and held the door open. I needed a cosigner for a studio apartment in the next town over. I had the cash for the deposit hidden in my shoe. Not my box, but I had no credit history. I asked him if he would sign. I promised him I would never miss a payment. I showed him my ledger, my proof that I knew how to manage money better than the people who raised me. Derek looked at the notebook. He traced the columns of numbers with a shaking finger. Then he looked at me. "You are going to be scary one day, kid," he said, and he meant it as a compliment. He signed the papers later that morning. He drove me to the apartment, a shoebox above a laundromat that smelled of detergent and stale smoke. It was the most beautiful place I had ever seen because it was mine. Before he left, Derek leaned against his rusted truck and gave me the only piece of parental advice I ever received that was worth a damn. "Violet," he said, lighting a cigarette, "listen to me. They are going to realize you are gone. And at first, they will be angry. But eventually, they will need something, maybe money, maybe a kidney, maybe just someone to punch down on. They will come back. And they will be sweet. They will act like none of this happened." He exhaled a cloud of smoke. "Do not go back when they are sweet," he said. "That is the trap. You treat them like a bad investment. You cut your losses." I nodded. I hugged him, breathing in the smell of tobacco and Old Spice. I never went back to the house in Briar Glen. I did not leave a note. I did not send a text. A note would have been an explanation. And explanations are for people who care what the other party thinks. I did not care. I wanted to be a ghost. I changed my phone number that afternoon. I blocked their emails. I became a ghost in the system. A glitch they could not fix. For the first few weeks, I expected to feel sad. I expected to miss my mother's cooking or the smell of the house. But as I sat on the floor of my empty apartment, eating instant noodles and studying my textbooks under a bare light bulb, I realized I felt something else entirely. I felt light. I had dropped the dead weight of their expectations. I was poor. I was exhausted. I was alone. But every dollar in my pocket was mine. Every grade I earned was mine. Every breath I took belonged to me. I vowed then, staring at the peeling wallpaper, that I would never ask anyone for permission to exist again. I would build a fortress of success so high that they would break their necks trying to look up at me. 9 years later, standing in that hallway in Savannah, I knew I had built that fortress, but as I looked at Graham Kessler's pale face, I realized that Derek was right. The past does not just go away. It waits for you to make a mistake. But they had made the mistake. They thought I was still the girl with the suitcase. They did not know that the suitcase was gone, and in its place, I carried a scalpel, and I was finally ready to use it. The first 2 years of my freedom did not taste like victory. They tasted like stale diner coffee and the metallic tang of adrenaline. Independence, I quickly learned, was not a glamorous movie montage. It was a physical grind that settled deep into your bones and refused to leave. My life became a series of logistical equations that had to be solved every single day. I had 24 hours to allocate. 8 hours went to the diner, where I memorized orders and smiled at customers who tipped based on how short my skirt was. 6 hours went to community college classes, sitting in the front row with a thermos, absorbing macroeconomics and statistics with a desperation that unnerved my professors. 4 hours went to sleep, usually in 20-minute intervals between shifts or study sessions. The remaining hours were a chaotic mix of transit, hygiene, and panic. I did not have the luxury of the college experience my sister was enjoying. I saw her posts on social media sometimes, before I blocked her pictures of tailgate parties, dorm room decorations, and late-night pizza runs paid for by my parents. My college experience was calculating the nutritional density of peanut butter versus ramen noodles. It was walking past the campus bookstore, unable to afford the new editions, and spending hours in the library photocopying the required chapters from the reserve copy until the librarian, a stern woman named Mrs. Gable, started looking the other way when I exceeded the page limit. But there was a fire in me that Briar Glen had failed to extinguish. In fact, by cutting me off. My parents had poured gasoline on it. I attacked my education with the ferocity of a soldier clearing a bunker. I did not just want to pass. I wanted to dominate. When I scored a 98 on my intermediate accounting final, I did not celebrate. I went to the professor's office and asked where I lost the 2 points. He looked at me, bewildered, and told me that nobody had ever cared about the margin of error that much. That was when I knew what I wanted to do. I fell in love with forensic finance. It was not a passion for money itself. I actually despised the way money was worshipped. My passion was for the truth that money could not hide. People lie. My parents lied. Sloan lied. But numbers were incapable of deceit. If a dollar was moved from column A to column B, it left a footprint. If an asset was undervalued, it created a distortion in the gravity of the ledger. I realized that the entire world was telling stories through spreadsheets, and most people were skipping the details. I read the details. I started winning scholarships. First, it was $500 from a local Rotary Club. Then it was $1,000 from a Women in Business initiative. I applied for everything. I wrote essays on my phone during my breaks at the diner, my thumbs flying over the cracked screen, crafting narratives about resilience and ambition. I did not tell them about my parents. I did not sell a sob story. I sold them on my potential. I told them I was a safe bet, and I was. By the time I transferred to the state university to finish my degree, I had secured enough grant money to quit the diner and work a slightly more dignified job as a research assistant. I was 22, but I felt 40. My eyes were always scanning for risk. My posture was rigid. I walked through the world like I was anticipating a blow. It was in a humid, overcrowded gymnasium during a volunteer event that I met Rowan. I was there to offer free tax preparation and financial literacy counseling for low-income families. Rowan was there as a second-year resident, stitching up minor wounds and checking blood pressure. The event was chaotic. A fuse blew, killing the air conditioning, and the noise level was deafening. I was sitting at a folding table, calmly explaining the intricacies of the earned income tax credit to a terrified young mother. When a stack of heavy boxes near the medical station toppled over, people screamed, volunteers scrambled. I did not flinch. I finished my sentence, handed the woman her paperwork, and then stood up to assess the damage. Rowan told me later that she was watching me. She said that while everyone else was running around like headless chickens, I moved with a scary kind of efficiency. I walked over, righted the boxes, reorganized the queue that had disintegrated, and went back to my table without saying a word. She came over to me during the lunch break. She was wearing blue scrubs, her hair tied back in a messy bun, looking exhausted but radiant. She handed me a bottle of water. "You are the calmest person I've ever seen," Rowan said. "It is unnerving." I took the water. "I am not calm," I said. "I am just efficient. Panic is a waste of resources." She laughed. It was a warm, genuine sound that disarmed me. Most people found my intensity off-putting. Rowan found it fascinating. We did not fall in love in a whirlwind. I did not have the emotional bandwidth for a whirlwind. We fell in love like a slow, steady accumulation of compound interest. Rowan was the first person I told about my family, not because I needed her to save me, but because I needed her to understand why I double-checked the locks on the door every night. She did not pity me. She did not try to fix it. She just listened, holding my hand, her surgeon's fingers strong and steady. Rowan was not my life raft. I had already built my own boat. She was the lighthouse. She was the place I could dock when the storm was over and just breathe. After graduation, I did not take the safe corporate job at a Big Four accounting firm. I had spent too long following other people's rules. I wanted to write the rules. I co-founded Luminarch Compliance Group with a brilliant, socially awkward data scientist I met in grad school. Our pitch was simple. We would use advanced data analytics to find the needles in the haystacks that traditional auditors missed. We targeted mid-sized corporations, hospital networks, and supply chains, places where corruption grew like mold in the dark. The first 2 years were terrifying. We lived on ramen again. We worked out of a garage that smelled of damp concrete. But then, we caught a regional logistics manager skimming 3% off shipping contracts. We handed the board of directors a report so detailed, it was practically an indictment. Word got around. If you wanted to clean house, you called Luminarch. If you wanted to hide something, you prayed we did not get hired. I learned to speak a new language. I learned to sit in boardrooms with men twice my age who wore suits that cost more than my first apartment. I learned to look them in the eye and tell them that their internal controls were garbage without blinking. I learned to read legal contracts better than some lawyers. I mastered the art of the corporate no, the polite, firm refusal that left no room for negotiation. This was not just professional development, it was armor building. Every successful audit, every exposed lie, every confrontation I won added a layer of Kevlar to my soul. I was proving to myself, over and over again, that I could see the truth even when powerful people tried to hide it. But I never forgot where I came from. I still had the recordings. The old phone from high school was long dead, but the files lived on. I had them saved on an encrypted cloud server. I had them on a physical hard drive locked in a fireproof safe in our home office. I had a backup thumb drive in a safety deposit box at a bank across town. I did not listen to them. I could not bear to hear my mother's voice calling me a burden or my father's dismissive laughter, but I needed to know they existed. They were my insurance policy against gaslighting. They were the tangible proof that my history was real, that I was not the crazy, ungrateful daughter they told everyone I was. Sometimes, late at night, when the imposter syndrome crept in, when I worried that maybe I really was the problem, I would log into the cloud server. I would just look at the file names. Kitchen argument _August _2016.mp3. Dad tuition refusal .mp3. Sloan mocking job .mp3. Just seeing the dates and times grounded me. It reminded me that I had survived. When the invitation to Sloane's wedding arrived, sent to an old email address I used for spam, my first instinct was to delete it. Why reopen the wound? Rowan found me staring at the screen, my finger hovering over the mouse. You do not have to go, she said, rubbing my shoulders. We can go to Paris. We can go to the coast. We can do anything else. I looked at the invitation. It was heavy with gold foil script. It screamed of the money they had claimed they did not have for me. If I do not go, I said, realizing the truth as I spoke it, they get to keep telling the story. They get to tell everyone I am the lost, bitter sister who was too ashamed to show up. They get to own the narrative. I turned to look at my wife. I saw the life we had built. The beautiful, modern house we owned paid for with my earnings. The career I had forged from nothing. The stability that was not given, but earned. I want them to see me. I said, not the 17-year-old girl with the suitcase. I want them to see this version. I want them to look me in the eye and realize that they did not break me. They just forged me. I made a promise to myself as I RSVP'd yes to that wedding. I would not ask for an apology. I would not ask for reimbursement. I would not ask for love. I was done asking. I prepared for the wedding the same way I prepared for a hostile audit. I researched the venue. I researched the groom's family, the Kesslers. I knew their business holdings. I knew their reputation, and purely by coincidence, or perhaps fate, I realized that the name Kessler Logistics was on a list of vendors currently under review by one of Luminarch's clients. It was a small world. and gravity always pulls things to the center. So, when I walked into the Oglethorpe Hotel, I was not just a guest. I was a loaded weapon with the safety off. I had spent 9 years learning how to survive in the wild. I had learned that you do not beg predators for mercy. You become something they are afraid to bite. My parents thought they had starved me out. They did not realize that hunger sharpens the senses. They thought they had taught me to be independent. They were right. They just didn't realize that my independence would eventually become their reckoning. I was walking into that ballroom not to cause a scene, but to stand as a living, breathing testament to their failure to destroy me. And if they tried to push me, if they tried to drag me back into the mud, they would find that I was no longer the soft clay they remembered. I was concrete, and concrete does not bend. The ballroom of the Oglethorpe Hotel was a masterpiece of Southern Gothic elegance. Crystal chandeliers the size of small cars hung from the ceiling, casting a warm, flattering light on the 300 guests milling about with their champagne flutes. A string quartet was playing a soft, inoffensive version of a pop song in the corner. It was the perfect stage for a fairy tale wedding. But as Rowan and I moved toward table 19, situated near the back by the kitchen doors as I had predicted, the atmosphere around us felt less like a celebration and more like a gladiatorial arena. We had technically escaped the hallway, but we had not escaped the narrative. Marianne and Sloane had followed us in, not immediately, but after a calculated pause to compose themselves. Now, they were working the room. I sat down at the table, smoothing the fabric of my dress. I kept my back straight, my hands folded on my lap. I watched them. It was a fascinating, if nauseating, display of social engineering. Marianne was moving from group to group, her hand fluttering to her chest, her expression a mask of pained maternal concern. She would lean in, whisper something to a guest, and then cast a sorrowful glance in my direction. The guests would then turn, look at me with a mixture of pity and alarm, and nod sympathetically at my mother. She is telling them I am unstable. I said to Rowan, my voice barely above a whisper, she is setting the baseline. If I raise my voice, if I cry, if I do anything other than sit here like a statue, I prove her right. Rowan took a sip of water, her eyes tracking Marianne's progress. It is a trap, Rowan said. They want you to explode. They want a reason to call security that does not look like cruelty. I know, I replied. I felt a cold calm settle over me. It was the same feeling I got when I opened a ledger that I knew was fraudulent. The numbers were lying, and the person who wrote them was daring me to find the error. My mother was daring me to break. Sloane was less subtle. She was the bride, the center of the universe for this while one day. And she was using that gravity to pull people into her orbit of outrage. She stood near the head table, surrounded by her bridesmaids, gesturing wildly toward me. I could read her lips across the room, ruining it, obsessed, crazy. A few minutes later, the inevitable happened. They could not stand my silence. My refusal to engage, my refusal to look ashamed, was driving them mad. They needed a reaction. They needed the catharsis of my humiliation. Marianne and Sloane approached our table. They did not come alone. They brought an audience, 2 of Sloane's bridesmaids and an aunt I vaguely remembered as being particularly judgmental. The music seemed to dip. The conversation at the nearby tables died down. The air pressure in the room shifted. "Violet," Marianne said. Her voice was loud enough to carry to the next 3 tables. "Why are you sitting here? You know you are making everyone uncomfortable." I looked up at her. I did not stand. Standing would have been an act of aggression. Sitting was an act of permanence. I am sitting here because it is my assigned seat. "Mother," I said. My tone was conversational, polite. Sloane stepped forward. Her face flushed. She looked manic. "Do not call her that. You lost the right to call her that when you ran away and broke her heart." I saw the guests at the neighboring tables lean in. This was the show they had not expected, but secretly wanted. The drama, the dirty laundry. I did not run away. "Sloane," I said, keeping my gaze steady. I was evicted. "There is a difference," liar Sloane shouted. The word cracked through the polite atmosphere of the room. A waiter dropped a fork. Marianne put a hand on Sloane's arm, playing the peacemaker for the crowd. "Shh, darling, do not let her upset you. That is what she wants. She wants attention. She has always been jealous of you. You know that." Marianne turned her gaze to me, her eyes filled with a toxic mixture of pity and malice. "We just want you to leave, Violet. Please, for the sake of the family. You are clearly not well. We can call you a car. We can get you help." It was a masterclass in gaslighting. To the observer, she was a concerned mother dealing with a mentally ill daughter. To me, she was a predator circling a wounded animal. Rowan stood up. The scrape of her chair against the floor was loud. Rowan was tall, imposing in her tailored suit, and she possessed the natural authority of a doctor who routinely made life-or-death decisions. She did not look at Marianne or Sloane. She looked down at me. "Are you okay?" Rowan asked. It was a simple question. 3 words. But in that room, it was an act of defiance. It signaled to everyone watching that I was not a pariah. I was loved. I was protected. "I am fine," I said, looking up at her. "Thank you." Sloane laughed. A harsh, brittle sound. "Oh, that is precious. You found someone to take care of you. Did you tell her the truth, Violet? Or did you trick her like you trick everyone else?" Sloane turned to Rowan, her lip curling in a sneer. "You should be careful. She is a parasite. She latches onto people who have actually achieved something because she cannot do anything herself. She is just using you to climb out of the gutter." I felt a flash of heat in my chest, not for myself, but for Rowan. They could insult me all day, but dragging my wife into their mud was a violation of the treaty I had imposed on myself. Rowan did not blink. She looked at Sloane with a clinical detachment, as if Sloane were a fascinating but unpleasant medical specimen. "Violet does not need me to climb anywhere," Rowan said, her voice cool and crisp. "She is the most capable person I know, and frankly, your assessment of her character says much more about you than it does about her." Sloane's mouth opened and closed. She was not used to being spoken to like that. She was used to being the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. Marianne stepped in. Sensing her daughter was losing ground, she decided to go for the jugular. She decided to attack the one thing she thought was my biggest failure. Capable Marianne scoffed. She looked around at the guests, inviting them to share in the joke. Violet dropped out of community college. She could not even finish a 2-year degree. She has been drifting for 9 years. The whisper went through the room. Dropout, failure, drifter. In a room full of doctors, lawyers, and business owners, this was social suicide. It was the ultimate mark of shame. Marianne smiled, thinking she had delivered the killing blow. She thought I was still the girl who cried over tuition checks. She thought my silence was shame. She was wrong. I stood up. I did not rush. I unfolded my body slowly, smoothing my dress. I picked up my clutch. I looked at Marianne. For the first time in 9 years, I let the mask slip just enough for her to see the steel underneath. I did not drop out. "Mother," I said. My voice was not loud, but it had a resonance that cut through the murmur of the crowd. Marianne rolled her eyes. "Oh, stop lying. You left. You quit." I took a step closer to her. The guests were silent now. The string quartet had stopped playing. The room was holding its breath. I did not drop out. I repeated, articulating every syllable. I was dropped. Marianne froze. The smile faltered on her face. "You cut off my funding 3 days before the deadline." I continued, my voice steady as a heartbeat. "You told me I had to be independent while you wrote a check for Sloane's dorm room. You took my rent money. You took my tips. I did not leave because I couldn't handle the work. I left because I refused to be the fuel you burned to keep her warm." The silence was absolute. It was heavy. It was the kind of silence that happens when a truth is spoken that is so raw, so undeniable, that it sucks the oxygen out of the room. Sloane looked panic-stricken. She looked at the guests, seeing the shift in their eyes. People were not looking at me with pity anymore. They were looking at Marianne with confusion. They were doing the math. "That is a lie," Sloane shrieked. She's making it up. I turned to Sloane. I did not have to yell. I just looked at her with the weary patience of an adult dealing with a toddler. I have the bank records. Sloane, I said softly. It was a bluff. Well, partially. I did have the records, but I wasn't holding them. But the specific mention of records triggered something in the room. It sounded professional. It sounded verifiable. Marianne looked like she had been slapped. She opened her mouth to speak, to spin another lie, to reclaim the narrative, but she never got the chance. Graham Kessler appeared, the groom, the man of the hour. He pushed through the circle of bridesmaids. He did not look like a man in love. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost walk out of a grave and hand him a subpoena. He had clearly been at the bar. His tie was slightly crooked, but his eyes were laser-focused. They were not focused on his crying bride. They were not focused on his indignant mother-in-law. They were glued to me. Graham stopped 3 feet away. He stared at me with a mixture of recognition and horror that was so potent it was almost palpable. He looked at me the way a criminal looks at the police officer who just walked into the interrogation room holding the smoking gun. Sloane grabbed his arm. Graham, do something. She is ruining everything. Tell them she is a liar. Graham did not look at her. He pulled his arm away from her grip. It was a subtle movement, but it spoke volumes. He took a step toward me. His face was pale, glistening with a sheen of sweat under the chandeliers. You, Graham whispered. The guests leaned in. They expected him to curse me. They expected him to throw me out. Instead, Graham Kessler looked at me as if I were a biological weapon that had just been detonated in the center of his wedding reception. You are Violet Fisher, he said. It wasn't a question. It was a confirmation of a nightmare. I nodded. Hello? Graham? He swallowed hard. He looked at Rowan, then back at me. Then he said the thing that changed the entire trajectory of the night. He said the thing that proved my instincts and my career were sharper than anyone in my family could comprehend. Luminarch, Graham said. His voice shook. You are the external auditor from Luminarch. Sloane looked confused. What is Luminarch? Who cares? But Marianne went still. She did not know what Luminarch was. But she knew the tone of a man who was terrified, and Graham was terrified. I smiled. It was a small, professional smile. The kind of smile I gave across a boardroom table right before I slid a dossier of incriminating evidence toward a CEO. Yes, I said, I am. It is a pleasure to finally meet you in person. Graham, I have spent a lot of time reviewing your files. The color drained from Graham's face completely. He looked as if his knees were about to buckle. Sloane looked between us, her desperation rising. Graham, what are you talking about? Why are you talking to her like that? Kick her out. Graham turned to his wife. For the first time, he looked at her not with adoration, but with the frantic calculation of a man realizing he had been sold a bill of goods. Shut up, Sloane, Graham snapped. The room gasped. Sloane recoiled as if he had hit her. Graham looked back at me. His eyes were pleading. He was realizing, in real time, that the dropout sister-in-law, the failure, the charity case, was actually the one person who held the power to dismantle his entire financial existence. We need to talk. Graham said to me, now. I checked my watch. I glanced at Rowan. Then I looked back at my family, my mother, standing with her mouth open, and my sister, trembling with shock. I am actually enjoying the party. Graham, I said coolly, but if you insist, the social pressure had inverted. The humiliation they had planned for me had boomeranged. I was no longer the unwanted guest. I was the person holding the keys to the castle, and the king was begging for a parley. The silence that hung over table 19 was not the quiet of a library. It was the silence of a bomb squad, watching a timer tick down to 0. Graham Kessler stood before me, his chest heaving slightly beneath his tuxedo. His face stripped of all the arrogance that usually accompanies a groom on his wedding day. He asked the question again, but this time, his voice was barely a whisper. It was small, tight, and terrified. You are Violet Fisher, he said, the words feeling their way out of his throat. Of Luminarch Compliance Group. I looked at him. I did not blink. I did not smile. I let the question hang there for a second, letting the weight of the company name sink into the minds of the people listening. Most of the guests were confused. To them, Luminarch sounded like just another corporate entity. But to Graham, and to anyone in that room who worked in high-level logistics or finance, that name was a predator. Yes, I answered. One word. Simple. Absolute. Graham flinched. It was a physical reaction. A jerk of his head, as if I had raised a hand to strike him. He took a half step back, his eyes darting from my face to the hands I had folded calmly on the tablecloth. Fisher, he murmured, more to himself than to me. The senior lead analyst on the Kessler supply chain audit. That is correct, I said. My tone was professional, devoid of warmth, the same tone I used when delivering a notice of non-compliance. I signed off on the initial risk assessment 3 weeks ago. Graham, I believe my team is currently waiting for several requested documents regarding your offshore vendor payments. The color that had drained from his face did not return. Instead, he turned a shade of gray that matched the expensive silk napkins. Graham turned slowly to face Sloane. His movements were stiff, robotic. The adoration that had been in his eyes when she walked down the aisle an hour ago was gone. It had been replaced by a look of profound betrayal. You told me, Graham said, his voice trembling with a suppressed rage, that she was a failure. Sloane blinked, her false eyelashes fluttering. She looked from Graham to me, sensing the ground shifting beneath her feet but not understanding why. She tried to laugh, but it came out as a strangled, high-pitched squeak. She is, Graham, Sloane insisted, reaching for his arm again. He pulled away sharply. Look at her. She is just trying to sound important. She probably works in the mailroom or answers the phones. Why are you listening to her? The mailroom, Graham repeated. He looked at his new wife as if she were a stranger he had just met in a dark alley. Sloane, do you have any idea what Luminarch does? Who cares? Sloane snapped, her patience fraying. It is just a job. This is our wedding. Why are you talking about work? Because, Graham said through gritted teeth, I have seen her name on documents that could shut my father's company down. I have seen her signature on federal compliance requests. He pointed a shaking finger at me. I asked you about your sister, months ago. When the audit started, I asked if there was any relation. And Sloane crossed her arms, trying to summon the petulant authority that usually worked for her. And you told me, Graham hissed, his voice rising just enough for the surrounding tables to hear every syllable, that your sister was a dropout. You said she was mentally unstable and living off the state. You told me she was a nobody so I would not worry about the connection. Sloane scoffed, rolling her eyes. So I was protecting you. I did not want you to worry about my embarrassing family drama. She is a nobody, Graham. She is just Violet. Graham stared at her. She is the lead auditor investigating my family's business. Sloane, do you understand what that means? It means if there is a conflict of interest, or if she finds something. He trailed off, the implication hanging heavy in the air. The atmosphere in the hallway had shifted completely. The domestic drama, the jealous sister, the cruel mother had evaporated. In its place was something much colder and much more dangerous, a professional crisis. The guests were no longer looking at me with pity. I saw a man at the next table, a silver-haired gentleman who looked like a managing partner at a law firm, lean forward and whisper something to his wife. He was looking at me with respect. He knew what Luminarch was. He knew that you did not get to be a lead analyst there by being a dropout. Marianne, sensing the change in the wind, decided to intervene. My mother was a chameleon. She could shift from aggressive to maternal in the span of a heartbeat if it served her interests. She saw that Graham was panicking, and she saw that Sloane was losing him. She stepped between Graham and me, blocking his view of me. She put a smile on her face that was so sugary it was almost grotesque. Oh, for heaven's sake, Marianne laughed, waving her hand dismissively. This is all just a silly misunderstanding. Work talk at a wedding. How boring. She turned to me. her eyes wide and pleading, though the malice was still swimming just beneath the surface. "Violet, darling," she cooed, "why don't we go find a quiet room, just the family? We have been so estranged, and clearly, there is so much to catch up on. We should not be doing this in front of the guests. It is rude." She reached out to touch my shoulder, attempting to guide me away, to pull me into the shadows where she could manipulate the narrative without witnesses. I did not move. I did not flinch. I simply looked at her hand until she dropped it. "No," I said. Marianne's smile faltered. "Excuse me." "I said no," I repeated. "I am not going to a quiet room. Marianne, I am eating my dinner. I was invited. I have a seat." "Violet, please," Marianne hissed, dropping her voice so only I could hear. "Do not do this. You are embarrassing your sister." "I am not doing anything," I said, raising my voice slightly so that Graham could hear me clearly. "I am answering questions. Graham asked me who I was. I told him, if you have something to say to me." "Mother, you can say it right here. These people have already heard you call me a failure and a mental case. I think they can handle the rest of the conversation." Marianne looked around. She saw the eyes of the guests. She saw Rowan sitting next to me, looking calm and formidable. She realized she had lost the ability to isolate me. Graham stepped around Marianne. He ignored his mother-in-law completely. He looked at me with a desperate intensity. He looked like a man standing on a trapdoor, wondering if I was the one holding the lever. "Violet," Graham said, "did you know—" "Know what?" I asked innocently. "That I was that Sloane was?" He struggled to find the words. "Did you take the case because of me?" "I do not pick my cases, Graham," I said. "The algorithm flags discrepancies, and I follow the data. The data led me to Kessler Logistics. The fact that you are marrying my sister is a coincidence, a very unfortunate coincidence for you, considering the state of your ledgers." Graham flinched again. "We can fix it," he said quickly. "Whatever you found, it is just paperwork. It is just errors." "Is it?" I asked. I let a small, dry smile touch my lips. "That remains to be seen." Sloane stomped her foot. Actually stomped it. "Stop talking to her like she is important. She is ruining my wedding, Graham. Tell the security to throw her out right now." Graham turned on her. The movement was so sudden that Sloane actually took a step back. "Will you stop?" Graham shouted. The room went dead silent. The string quartet stopped playing mid-measure. Graham looked at his bride. He looked at the woman he had just pledged his life to. He looked at the expensive dress, the perfect makeup, the carefully constructed facade of the golden child. And then he looked at me, the woman she had dismissed, the woman she had lied about, the woman who held his professional life in the palm of her hand. He saw the cracks. "You lied to me," Graham said. "You looked me in the eye and told me your sister was a burnout. You told me she was nothing." "She is nothing," Sloane screamed, tears beginning to streak her mascara. "She is a lead auditor for the firm investigating me," Graham roared back. "That is not nothing, Sloane. That is the most dangerous person in my life right now." He ran a hand through his hair, disheveling the perfect style. He looked frantic. He looked like he was replaying every conversation he had ever had with Sloane, every story she had told him, every explanation she had given for why her family was the way it was. "If you lied about this," Graham said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, low register, "if you lied about who she is, what she is capable of." He took a step closer to Sloane. Sloane shrank back, bumping into Marianne. "What else?" Graham asked. Sloane shook her head. "Nothing. I have not lied about anything else. I did not want you to like her." It was a childish admission, but it rang with a hollow truth. But Graham was not buying it. The doubt had taken root. I could see it spreading behind his eyes like a virus. He was looking at her, and he was seeing a stranger. "You told me your parents paid for everything," Graham said. "You told me you had a trust fund. You told me you graduated with honors." Sloane's eyes widened. She looked at Marianne for help, but Marianne was frozen, realizing the dominoes were starting to fall. I did, Sloane squeaked. I did graduate with honors. Graham looked at me. He didn't say a word, but the question was there. Did she? I did not answer. I did not have to. I just held his gaze, my expression unreadable. I let the silence do the work. I let his own paranoia fill in the blanks. Graham turned back to Sloane. He looked at her with a mix of disgust and fear. I need a drink, Graham said. Graham? No. Sloane grabbed his hand. We have to cut the cake. We have to do the first dance. I cannot dance with you right now, Graham said, pulling his hand away as if her skin were toxic. I cannot even look at you right now. He turned and walked away. He did not walk toward the head table. He walked toward the bar outside on the terrace. Sloane stood there, abandoned in the middle of the ballroom floor. 300 guests watched her. Her mother stood beside her, pale and trembling. I picked up my fork. I turned to Rowan. The sea bass looks excellent, I said quietly. Rowan squeezed my knee under the table. You are terrifying, she whispered, but there was a smile in her voice. I am just independent, I replied. Cutting a piece of fish, across the room. Sloane let out a sob, but nobody moved to comfort her. The spell was broken. The perfect family portrait had not just cracked. It had fallen off the wall and shattered. And everyone was staring at the ugly bare spot it had left behind. And Graham Kessler was outside, drinking scotch, and realizing that he had married a woman he did not know, while the woman who could destroy him was eating dinner at table 19. Graham did not stay on the terrace for long. I watched him through the floor-to-ceiling glass doors. He downed his scotch in one swallow, the amber liquid disappearing as if he were trying to put out a fire in his throat. Then he turned around. The look on his face had hardened. It was no longer just fear or confusion. It was the cold, calculating look of a man who realizes he has bought a lemon and is looking for the receipt. He marched back into the ballroom. He did not go to the head table where his parents were sitting, blissfully unaware that their son's marriage was dissolving before the salad course. He walked straight back to us. Sloane was still standing near our table, dabbing at her eyes with a napkin while Marianne whispered frantic reassurances into her ear. When they saw Graham returning, they both straightened up. Marianne put on her best smile, the one she used to charm PTA boards and bank managers. There you are, darling, Marianne said, reaching out as if to guide him. Come, let us sit down. The speeches are about to start. Graham walked right past her. He stopped in front of Sloane. He did not touch her. He stood with his hands in his pockets, rocking slightly on his heels. I have a question, Graham said. His voice was conversational, but it carried a dangerous weight. Sloane blinked, her smile trembling. Graham, please, not here. Here is fine, Graham said. Here is actually perfect because your sister is here, and she seems to be the only one who knows how to answer a direct question today. He looked at me for a split second, acknowledging my presence, then turned his laser focus back to his bride. Tell me about your degree again, Graham said. Sloane froze. What? Your degree, Graham repeated. University of Pennsylvania, right class of 2019, Bachelor of Science in Healthcare Administration. Yes, Sloane said, her voice breathy. Of course. Why are you asking me this? Because, Graham said. I was just thinking about the timeline. We met in 2020. You told me you had just finished a gap year after graduation, but my mother mentioned something yesterday. She said she tried to look up your graduation announcement in the university archives to frame it as a gift. She could not find it, Marianne interjected immediately. Oh, those archives are notoriously messy. They miss names all the time. I remember when your father graduated, they spelled his name wrong for 3 years. Graham held up a hand to silence her. He did not look away from Sloane. What was your capstone project on? Graham asked. Sloane looked like a deer caught in the headlights of a semi-truck. My what? Your capstone, Graham said. Every senior in that program does one. I know because I hire graduates from there. What was yours about? Sloane licked her lips. Her eyes darted around the room, looking for an exit, looking for a lifeline. It was about hospital management, efficiency. Specifics. Sloan, Graham pressed. Was it about patient flow, supply chain logistics, insurance compliance? Insurance. Sloan latched onto the word like a drowning woman grabbing a rope. Yes, it was about insurance, and making sure the patients paid the right amount. Under the Affordable Care Act, provisions for strictly liable payments. I heard a small, sharp intake of breath next to me. Rowan had been sitting quietly, observing the scene with her doctor's detachment, but hearing that sentence was too much for her professional integrity. She set her fork down with a deliberate click. "That is not a thing," Rowan said. Sloan whipped her head around to glare at Rowan. "Excuse me." Rowan looked at her calmly. "Strict liability is a tort law concept. Sloan, it has nothing to do with insurance payments under the Affordable Care Act, and if you had written a thesis on healthcare administration, you would know that—" Sloan's face turned a violent shade of red. "I know what I wrote. I am just flustered. You are trying to confuse me." "I am not trying to confuse you," Rowan said, her voice smooth and reasonable. "I am pointing out that you are using vocabulary words you memorized from a Google search, and you are using them incorrectly." "Stop it," Sloan screamed, her voice cracked, shrill and desperate. "This is my wedding. This is not an interrogation. Why are you doing this to me?" She looked at the guests surrounding us. "They are ruining my day. Someone make them stop." But nobody moved. The guests were transfixed. It was like watching a car crash in slow motion. You wanted to look away, but the physics of the disaster demanded your attention. Graham stepped closer to her. "I am doing this," he said, his voice dropping to a low, intense volume, "because I am not marrying a stranger, and right now, I do not know who you are." "I am Sloan," she sobbed. "I am the woman you love." "I love the woman who told me she was an honor student," Graham said. "I love the woman who told me she built her own life. But that woman seems to be disappearing by the second." Marianne stepped in again, physically placing herself between them. She placed her hands on Graham's chest, trying to push him back, trying to reset the scene. "Graham, listen to me," Marianne said, her voice oozing with a practiced calm. "She is just under pressure. Look at her. She is shaking. Weddings are stressful. Brides forget things. She is exhausted. You are putting her on the spot. And her mind is going blank. It is just pressure. Darling, nothing more." It was a good performance. It was almost convincing. For a second, I saw Graham's shoulders sag. I saw him doubt himself. Maybe he was being too hard. Maybe it was just nerves. I could not let that happen. I could not let them plaster over the cracks again. I took a sip of my water. I set the glass down. "Pressure does not create fake transcripts," I said. My voice was not loud. I did not shout. I spoke with the flat, absolute authority of a judge reading a verdict. The effect was instantaneous. Sloan went rigid. Her sobbing cut off as if someone had severed her vocal cords. She stared at me, her eyes wide with a primal terror. She knew what I knew. She knew that I knew. Marianne glared at me. "Violet, shut your mouth." "No," Graham said. He looked at me. "What did you say?" "I said pressure does not create fake transcripts," I repeated, looking Graham in the eye. "You can forget the name of a professor. You can forget the title of a project, but you do not forget the fundamental concepts of your degree unless you never learned them." I paused, letting the silence stretch. "And you certainly do not panic unless you are afraid that the person asking the questions is about to find out that the degree does not exist." Sloan let out a strangled noise. "It exists. It does." Graham looked at Sloan. He looked at her reaction. He saw the terror. And the doubt that had been gnawing at him finally broke through the surface. "My family has a vetting process," Graham said quietly. Sloan looked at him. "What?" "For the business," Graham said. "When we got engaged, my father's security team ran a background check. It is standard. They check everyone who marries into the family because of the sensitivity of our contracts. He ran a hand over his face. They flagged something, a gap, 2 years where there was no record of you being enrolled at the university you claimed, no tuition payments, no credits. Sloane was shaking her head frantically. That is a mistake. The system lost my file. Mom said, I asked you about it. Graham interrupted her. And you told me it was a clerical error. You told me your parents paid in cash for those semesters, and the school messed up the digital records. You cried. You said you were so insulted that my family would investigate you. He laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. And I believed you. I told my father to drop it. I told him the records were wrong because I trusted you. He looked at me. But they weren't wrong, were they? Violet? No, I said. They were not. She dropped out, Graham said, the realization settling over him like a shroud. She didn't graduate. She was asked to leave, I corrected him gently. Academic dishonesty, Marianne gasped. Violet, how dare you? It is a matter of public record if you know where to look, I said. Or if you have the old emails. Graham looked like he was going to be sick, but he wasn't done. He reached into the inside pocket of his tuxedo jacket and pulled out his phone. He tapped the screen a few times, his fingers moving with a frantic energy. There was something else, Graham said. Something the security team found that I did not understand until this exact moment. He looked up from his phone, his eyes locking onto Sloane. They found a credit history, Graham said. A very good credit history. Attached to an address in Briar Glen, a rental property, but the name on the lease, the name on the utility bills, it wasn't Sloane Fisher. Sloane stopped breathing. I saw the color drain out of her face until she looked like a wax figure. It was under V. Fisher, Graham said. He turned the phone screen toward me. This is your old address. Isn't it the apartment above the laundromat? I looked at the screen. It was a credit report summary. And there, listed under the authorized user section for a credit card taken out 5 years ago, was my old address. I felt a cold spike of adrenaline. I had expected the lies about school. I had expected the lies about money. I had not expected this. I never authorized her to use that address, I said. My voice was ice. And I certainly never co-signed a loan for her. Graham turned back to Sloane. His voice was trembling with rage. You used her identity, Graham said. You used your sister's credit score to secure the loan for your car. The car you told me your parents bought you as a graduation gift. I just used the address, Sloane stammered, backing away. It was just for mail. It didn't mean anything. You forged her signature, Graham shouted. The report says, co-signatory V. Fisher. That is fraud. Sloane. That is federal fraud. It was Mom's idea, Sloane screamed. The confession hung in the air. Marianne closed her eyes. It was the first time I had ever seen her defeated. She had been thrown under the bus by the very monster she had created. She needed a car, Marianne said, her voice tight. Her credit was thin. You had good credit. Violet, we checked. We knew you wouldn't mind. You weren't using it for anything big. We made the payments. Mostly. Mostly? I repeated. I stood up. I walked around the table until I was standing right in front of my mother. You stole my identity, I said. You used the credit I built while I was scrubbing floors and eating ramen to finance a car for the daughter you were pampering, and you did it behind my back. We are family, Marianne hissed. Family helps each other. Family asks, I said. Criminals steal. Graham looked at his phone, then at Sloane, then at me. The puzzle pieces were slamming together. The unstable sister, the independent runaway, the perfect fiancé. It was all inverting. You told me she was the disaster, Graham whispered to Sloane. But she is the only thing about this family that is real. Graham, please, Sloane begged, reaching for him. I can explain. We can fix this. I will pay it off. Daddy will write a check. This isn't about money, Graham yelled. It is about the fact that I am standing at my own wedding. And I just found out that my wife is a fraud who stole her sister's identity. He looked at the guests. Hundreds of eyes were wide, staring. Phones were out. People were recording. The perfect day had become a viral moment. "I need to make a call," Graham said. He didn't look at Sloane. He looked at his father, who was finally making his way through the crowd, looking confused and angry. "Dad, get the legal team on the phone, now!" "Legal team," Sloane shrieked. "Graham, we are married. You can't sue me." Graham paused. He looked at her with a look of absolute emptiness. "We signed the papers an hour ago," Graham said. "But given what I just learned, I think I have a very strong case for annulment based on fraud." Sloane collapsed. She didn't faint. She just crumpled to the floor in a heap of white lace and tulle, sobbing hysterically. Marianne dropped to her knees beside her, glaring at me with the fury of a cornered rat. "Are you happy?" Marianne spat at me. "Are you happy now?" I looked down at them. I looked at the ruin of their lies. I looked at Graham, who was frantically talking to his father. "No," I said quietly. "I am not happy. I am just accurate." I turned to Rowan. "I think we should skip the cake." Rowan stood up, took my hand, and we walked toward the exit. But I knew we wouldn't get far. The explosion had happened, but the fallout was just beginning, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one who was going to get burned by the radiation. The chaos in the ballroom had settled into a simmering, toxic stew. Sloane was on the floor, weeping into her tulle skirt. Graham was standing over her, looking at his phone with the grim determination of a man performing an autopsy on his own life. My mother, Marianne, was vibrating with a mixture of rage and panic, her eyes darting around the room, realizing that her social capital was evaporating by the second. I could have walked away then. I could have taken Rowan's hand and left them in the wreckage of their own making. But I knew them. I knew that if I left a single inch of ambiguity, they would spin it. By tomorrow morning, the story would change. They would say I hacked the credit report. They would say I forged the documents. They would say I was a jealous saboteur who invented lies to destroy my sister's happiness. I could not leave them that opening. I had to close the file properly. I reached into my clutch. It was a small, elegant bag, barely large enough for a phone and a lipstick. But I had made room for one more thing. I pulled out a thin white envelope. I had prepared it 3 days ago, sitting at my kitchen island with a glass of wine and a stack of old files. I had hoped I would not have to use it. I had hoped that maybe, just maybe, they would let me sit in the back and eat my dinner in peace. But I am a risk analyst. I prepare for the worst-case scenario, because the worst-case scenario is usually the one that happens. I walked over to the table where Graham was standing. I did not look at Sloane. I placed the envelope on the white tablecloth next to the untouched wedding cake. "What is this?" Graham asked. His voice was hoarse. "Proof of character," I said calmly. "You are wondering how deep the lies go. Graham, you are wondering if this is just a mistake. Or if it is a pattern, this is the pattern." Graham picked up the envelope. His hands were shaking. He opened it and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was a summary spreadsheet I had compiled, attached to photocopies of redacted tax returns from 8 years ago. "What am I looking at?" Graham asked. "You are looking at my parents' tax filings for the years 2016 through 2018. I explained. I spoke clearly, ensuring the guests at the nearby tables, many of whom were business owners who understood tax law, could hear me. Specifically, the education tax credits. I pointed to a highlighted line on the page. "For 3 years after they kicked me out," I said, "my parents continued to claim me as a dependent student. They filed for the American Opportunity Tax Credit, claiming they were paying $4,000 a year in tuition and expenses for me." I looked at Calvin, my father, who was standing near the head table, looking as though he wanted to dissolve into the floor. "They did not pay a dime," I said. "I paid my own tuition. I paid my own rent. I paid for my own books. But because I was terrified of them, I did not file my own taxes independently those first 2 years. I let them claim me because I thought it was my duty. I thought I owed them, I turned back to Graham. They took a tax deduction for supporting a child they had thrown onto the street. That is not just lying, Graham. That is tax fraud. And it shows you exactly how much they value the truth when money is involved. A murmur went through the room. Financial infidelity is a language that wealthy people understand intimately. Adultery they could forgive. Substance abuse they could pity. But tax fraud. Stealing from the government while claiming moral superiority. That was a sin that stained. Marianne stepped forward. Her face twisted. That is ancient history. We made a mistake with the accountant. We were supporting you emotionally. Emotionally, I repeated. The word tasted like ash. I reached for my phone. I do not think that is true, Mother. I unlocked the screen and opened the file manager. I had the audio file queued up. It was labeled simply kitchen_conversation_December_2_1000_15. I recorded this the week before I left, I told the room. I was asking for help with my textbooks. Just $200. This was your response. I pressed play. The audio was slightly grainy, recorded on cheap hardware almost a decade ago. But the voices were unmistakable. The acoustics of our old kitchen in Briar Glen rang out through the silent ballroom. Voice of Calvin Fisher. Why would I invest in a mule that is what you are? Violet. You are built for work, not for thinking. You are good for bringing a paycheck home to us, not for spending it on books you will never understand. Sloan is the racehorse. You are the plow horse. Know your place. The recording ended. The silence that followed was absolute. It was heavy, suffocating, and total. I looked at my father. Calvin Fisher was a man who prided himself on his public image as a benevolent, hard-working family man. In 10 seconds of audio, that image had been decapitated. He had called his own daughter a mule. He had reduced his children to livestock, one for show, one for labor. Graham looked at his father-in-law with a look of pure revulsion. He looked like he was seeing a monster wearing a human suit. A plow horse, Graham whispered. Sloan stopped crying. She looked up from the floor. Her makeup smeared, her eyes wide. She realized that the sympathy in the room had shifted away from her family entirely. Nobody was looking at them as victims of a vengeful sister anymore. They were looking at them as abusers. He didn't mean it, Sloan shouted. Scrambling to her feet, she looked manic, her hair wild. He was just stressed. You are taking it out of context. The context, I said, sliding my phone back into my pocket, was that I was 17 years old, asking for help to better myself, and I was told my only value was to serve you. Graham turned to Sloan. Is that what you think of her? Is that what you think of me? Am I just another resource for you to harvest? No, Sloan screamed. She grabbed Graham's lapels. I love you, Graham. Prove it, Graham said. He was cold now. The heat of his anger had crystallized into something sharp. Unlock your phone. Sloan froze. What? Unlock your phone, Graham repeated. Log into the university registrar portal, right now. Show me the transcript. If you graduated, it is there. If you are telling the truth, show me the degree audit. He held out his own hand. Palm up. Do it. Sloan stared at his hand. She stared at the guests. She stared at me. She was trapped. There was no portal to log into. There was no transcript. If she opened that phone, the last vestige of her lie would die. I can't remember my password, Sloan stammered. Reset it, Graham said. I will wait. The Wi-Fi is bad in here. Sloan tried again. I have 5 bars, Graham said. Do it. Sloan. She looked at the phone in her hand. It was an iPhone, encased in a glittery case that matched her shoes. It was the device she used to curate her perfect life on Instagram. Now, it was the evidence locker. Panic is a chemical reaction. It overrides logic. It overrides self-preservation. Sloan did not unlock the phone. She let out a scream of frustration, a primal, childish sound, and threw the phone. She didn't throw it at the wall. She didn't throw it at me. She threw it straight down onto the marble floor of the ballroom. Crack! The sound was sickeningly loud. The glass shattered. But Sloane wasn't done. She stomped on it. She drove the heel of her white bridal shoe into the screen, grinding it into the stone, destroying the device with a frenzy that was terrifying to watch. "There!" Sloane shrieked, breathing hard, standing over the ruined electronics. "It is broken, I can't show you. Are you happy? It is broken." The room was frozen. This was not a tech mishap. This was a confession. An innocent person does not destroy the evidence that could exonerate them. A guilty person destroys the smoking gun. Graham looked down at the shattered phone. Then he looked up at Sloane. His face was blank, stripped of all emotion. "You are insane," Graham said quietly. Marianne lunged forward. She pointed a shaking finger at me. "Look what you did!" Marianne screamed. Her voice was shrill, desperate. "You provoked her. You came here to upset her. She is fragile, and you pushed her until she snapped. This is your fault, Violet. You are the toxic one." She looked around at the crowd, pleading for validation. "She did this. My daughter is under stress, and this monster pushed her." I opened my mouth to speak, but I did not have to. Rowan stepped in. My wife moved with the fluid grace of someone who has spent years navigating emergency rooms and board hearings. She stepped between me and Marianne, acting as a physical barrier. Her voice was not loud, but it projected with a calm, surgical authority that cut through Marianne's hysteria. "Mrs. Fisher," Rowan said, "I am a neurologist. I deal with the human brain under stress every single day." Rowan gestured to the smashed phone on the floor. "That is not the reaction of a person who has been provoked," Rowan said. "That is the reaction of a person who has been caught." She paused, letting the words sink in. "Nobody can provoke you into destroying evidence unless the evidence proves you are a liar." Rowan continued, "Truth does not panic. Truth does not smash phones. Only deception does that. Violet did not make your daughter a fraud. Violet just turned on the lights." Marianne recoiled. She had no defense against logic. She had no defense against the truth. I stepped up beside Rowan. I looked at my parents. I looked at the people who had raised me to feel small, who had tried to erase me. "I did not come here to ruin your day," I said. "I came here because you invited me. I came here to be a guest. But I made a promise to myself a long time ago." I smoothed the front of my dress. "I will never be your punching bag again," I said. "If you attack me, I will defend myself. If you lie about me, I will correct the record. I am not the 17-year-old girl you starved out of the house. I am a woman who knows exactly what she is worth, and I have the receipts to prove it." I looked at Graham. "I am sorry about your wedding. Graham, truly. But you should thank me. A divorce is expensive, but an annulment based on fraud is much cheaper, and living a lie costs the most of all." Graham nodded. It was a small, jerky movement. He looked like a man who had just survived a car crash and was walking away from the burning vehicle. "Go," Graham said to me. "Just go, please." It was not a command. It was a release. I took Rowan's hand. We turned around. The guests parted for us like the Red Sea. They stared at us with wide eyes, whispering behind their hands. But nobody tried to stop us. Nobody tried to insult us. We walked out of the ballroom, down the long hallway, and out into the cool night air of Savannah. The adrenaline was starting to fade, replaced by a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. My hands were trembling slightly. "You were amazing," Rowan said softly, wrapping an arm around my waist. "I feel sick," I admitted. "That is normal," Rowan said. "Detoxing usually feels terrible at first." We reached the valet stand. I fumbled for my ticket. My phone buzzed in my clutch. I pulled it out, expecting a text from work, or maybe a furious message from Sloane. It was neither. It was a text from a number I did not have saved. But I recognized the area code. It was a Pennsylvania number. I opened the message. "Sender Derek Morrow message. I heard you went to the wedding. I hope you gave them hell. Listen, kid, I was cleaning out some old boxes in the shed. I found something your grandmother gave me to hold on to before she passed. She didn't trust your mom with it. It is a trust deed. She left you something, a lot of something. Marianne told the lawyers it didn't exist, but I have the original signed copy. Call me. I stared at the screen. The phone illuminated my face in the darkness. My grandmother. The woman who had died when I was 12. The only other person in that family who had ever been kind to me. My parents had told me she died penniless. They had told me there was nothing left. I looked at the text again. A trust deed. Marianne told the lawyers it didn't exist. I felt a laugh bubble up in my chest. It wasn't a bitter laugh. It was a laugh of pure, incredulous shock. They had stolen my tuition. They had stolen my credit. And now, it seemed, they had stolen my inheritance. I showed the phone to Rowan. She read the text, her eyes widening. "Violet," Rowan said. "Do you know what this means?" I looked back at the hotel. Glowing in the night, inside, my family was tearing itself apart. Outside, I was standing with the final piece of the puzzle in my hand. "It means," I said, putting the phone back in my bag, "that the audit is not over. It is just moving to a new phase." I looked at the valet who pulled up our rental car. "And this time," I said, opening the door, "I am going to get everything they owe me, with interest." The silence inside the rental car was heavy, but it was not the suffocating silence of the wedding reception. It was the silence of a pressure chamber that had finally been depressurized. I drove. Rowan sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window at the passing streetlights of Savannah. We did not speak for the first 10 minutes. We just let the hum of the engine and the air conditioning wash over us. We were not fleeing. Fleeing implies guilt. We were simply removing ourselves from a crime scene we had solved. My hands were steady on the wheel, but my mind was racing, cataloging the events of the evening like a series of transaction entries. I had walked in. I had been attacked. I had presented evidence. I had walked out. It was a clean audit. Then the car's Bluetooth system chirped. Rowan looked at the dashboard screen. "It is the hospital," she said, frowning. "It is the after-hours line for the risk management department." She pressed the answer button. "This is Dr. Hale." The voice on the other end was tinny but urgent. I could hear the background noise of a busy office, even at 9 o'clock at night. "Dr. Hale, this is Marcus from compliance," the voice said. "I am sorry to disturb you, but we have a situation developing regarding the Kessler account. We received a notification about a potential integrity breach involving Graham Kessler. There are rumors of a public altercation involving fraud allegations at his wedding." Rowan looked at me. Her eyebrows shot up. News traveled fast, but in the world of high-stakes liability, news traveled at the speed of light. "I am aware of the situation. Marcus," Rowan said calmly. "I was there." "Okay," Marcus said, sounding relieved to have a source. "We need to know if this impacts the liability insurance for the merger his family's logistics firm is proposing with our supply network. Is there actual documentation of fraud, or is this just gossip?" Rowan paused. She looked at me, waiting for my signal. I kept my eyes on the road. I nodded once. "It is not gossip," Rowan said into the speaker. "There is credible evidence of identity theft and falsified academic credentials involving his wife, which may have been used to secure financial instruments. The external auditor from Luminark was present and verified the discrepancies." Luminark. Marcus sounded like he had just swallowed an ice cube. "The auditor was there." "The auditor is my wife," Rowan said, "and she does not make mistakes." "Understood," Marcus said. "We are freezing the Kessler contract pending a full review. Thank you. Dr. Hale." The line went dead. Rowan exhaled slowly. "Graham just lost a $12 million contract. He lost it months ago," I said, merging onto the highway. "He just found out about it tonight. Companies like that do not do business with people who cannot vet their own partners. If he cannot spot a fake degree in his own bed, he cannot be trusted with a medical supply chain." I reached for my phone, which was mounted on the dashboard. I unlocked it with a tap of my finger. I had one more email to send. I did not send it to the gossip blogs. I did not send it to Facebook. I opened my encrypted work email app. I composed a message to the internal legal compliance officer at Kessler Logistics, a man I had never met but whose email address I had memorized from the audit files. Subject: supplemental information regarding ongoing audit. File KL409. I attached 3 files, 2 audio recordings, 1 PDF of the tax summary. My message was brief: to the Compliance Board. Please find attached materials relevant to the character assessment and financial history of the primary shareholder's immediate family. These documents suggest a pattern of financial irregularity and identity fraud that may pose a risk to the company's bonding status. I am submitting these in accordance with my duty to report material facts. Regards, Violet Fisher. Luminarch. I hit send. It was clinical. It was precise. It was the dose of poison necessary to kill the infection. You really burnt it down, Rowan said softly. I did not light the match, I replied. I just pointed out that the house was made of straw. Back at the Oglethorpe Hotel, I knew exactly what was happening. I could visualize it with the clarity of a simulation. Graham would not be sleeping tonight. He would be in the bridal suite, but Sloane would probably be locked in the bathroom or banished to another room. Graham would be on his laptop. He would be doing the work he should have done 6 months ago. He would be calling the registrar's office at the University of Pennsylvania, navigating the automated menus, leaving frantic voicemails for the dean of students. He would be logging into his bank accounts, looking at the car payments, looking at the cosigner history, realizing that the V. Fisher he saw in the credit report was not a typo. He would be replaying every conversation he had ever had with Sloane, every time she was too busy to show him a paper, every time she lost a document, every time she cried to get out of a hard question. He would realize that his entire relationship was a construct, a house of cards built on the foundation of my stolen identity, and Sloane would be trying to spin. She would be texting her bridesmaids, telling them I was jealous, that I was off my meds, that I had photoshopped the tax returns. But it wouldn't stick, not this time, because I had been calm. If I had screamed, if I had thrown a drink, if I had slapped her, they could have dismissed me as the crazy sister. But I had stood there in my expensive dress, with my doctor wife, and I had spoken in paragraphs. I had cited tax codes. I had played audio evidence. You cannot call someone crazy when they are citing federal law. You can only call them dangerous. My phone buzzed again, and again, and again. A rapid-fire staccato of vibrations that shook the dashboard mount. I glanced at the screen. Mom calling, Dad calling, Mom calling, text from Mom. Violet, pick up the phone, text from Dad. You have killed your mother. She is hyperventilating. We are calling an ambulance. If you have a soul, you will come back here right now. I read the text about the ambulance and felt absolutely nothing. No spike in heart rate, no guilt. They are playing the medical card, I told Rowan. Dad says Mom is dying. Rowan rolled her eyes. Panic attack. At worst. She's not dying. She's losing control. And that feels like dying to a narcissist. They want me to come back, I said. They want to get me in a room alone. They want to yell. And then they want to cry. And then they want to negotiate. Are you going to answer? Rowan asked. No, I said. I do not negotiate with terrorists. I swiped the notifications away. Then, a different notification popped up. A green bubble. Derek Morrow sent a photo. I felt a jolt. Derek, the man who had given me my first apartment. The man who had warned me never to go back when they were sweet. I asked Rowan to open the message. Read it to me, I said. I am driving. Rowan tapped the screen. She zoomed in on the image. It looks like a legal document, Rowan said. It is old. The paper is yellowed. It is a trust deed. She squinted at the small text on the screen. I, Eleanor Vance, being of sound mind, Rowan read. Violet, this is your grandmother's will. Keep reading, I said. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel. It says... Rowan paused. She cleared her throat. It says, to my granddaughter, Violet Fisher. who has the spirit I always lacked. I leave the entirety of my investment portfolio to be held in trust until she reaches the age of 21. This trust is to be administered by her parents, Marianne and Calvin Fisher, solely for the purpose of her education and housing. Rowan went silent. How much? I asked. My voice was tight. The initial valuation 20 years ago was $80,000, Rowan whispered. Violet, with interest, with market growth, over 2 decades, that is. Hundreds of thousands, I finished. Enough for college, enough for a house, enough that I never should have had to work a double shift at a diner while studying for a calculus exam. Wait, Rowan said. There is a second page. Derek sent another photo. She swiped. It is a notarized affidavit, Rowan said. Signed by Marianne Fisher. Dated the year you turned 18. She read the text slowly, her voice hardening with every word. I, Marianne Fisher, attest that the beneficiary, Violet Fisher, has exhibited signs of severe behavioral instability and drug dependency. I almost swerved the car. Drug dependency. And as such, under the emergency clause of the trust, we are dissolving the asset to pay for her rehabilitation and necessary medical supervision. I slammed on the brakes. Luckily, the highway was empty. We skidded to a stop on the shoulder, the gravel crunching loudly under the tires. The car idled in the darkness. I sat there, staring out into the black void of the Georgia night. They hadn't just refused to pay for my college. They hadn't just stolen my tips. They hadn't just used my credit score. They had embezzled my inheritance. They had labeled me a drug addict, a girl who had never touched a substance harder than caffeine in her life to legally break the trust and steal the money my grandmother left me. And they had used that money, my money, to buy Sloane's car, to pay for Sloane's tuition, to pay for the perfect life they rubbed in my face. Everything they had given her was mine. I felt a coldness spread through my chest that was so intense it burned. It wasn't anger. Anger is hot. Anger is explosive. This was something else. This was the absolute zero of emotional detachment. I realized then that the tuition refusal wasn't a lesson in independence. It was a cover-up. They couldn't pay for my college because they had already spent my college fund on themselves. They had to kick me out because if I stayed, if I asked questions, if I saw the paperwork, I might have found out. They didn't hate me because I was a burden. They hated me because I was the victim of their felony. Rowan placed a hand on my arm. She didn't say anything. She knew that words were useless right now. She just offered her presence, a warm anchor in the freezing sea of my realization. I picked up the phone. I looked at the image of the document. Derek had added a caption. Text from Derek Marianne told the lawyers this document was destroyed in a flood. I kept the original in my safe. I thought you should know what you are fighting for. I looked at the signature. Eleanor Vance, my grandmother. The woman who used to sneak me candy when my mother said I was getting too heavy. The woman who told me I was smart. She had tried to save me, even from the grave. She had tried to give me a ladder, and my parents had burned the ladder and used the ash to pave the road for Sloane. Violet, Rowan asked softly, what do you want to do? I looked at her. I thought this was about tuition, I said. I thought it was about favoritism, but it is not. It is a criminal enterprise. I tapped the screen, saving the images to my secure cloud drive. They built a system, I said. A system designed to extract value from me and transfer it to Sloane. They turned me into a resource. They cannibalized my life to feed hers. I put the car back in drive. I merged back onto the highway. The lights of Savannah were fading behind us, but the road ahead was illuminated by the headlights, sharp and clear. Are you going to sue them? Rowan asked. Sue them? I laughed. It was a dark sound. Suing them is civil court. Suing them implies a dispute between equals. I gripped the steering wheel. This is fraud, I said. This is embezzlement. This is identity theft. This is grand larceny. I glanced at Rowan. I do not want revenge. Rowan, revenge is emotional. Revenge is messy. I want a correction. I looked at the road, my eyes narrowing. I want to end this distortion, I said. I want to audit this family until there is nothing left but the truth, and when I am done, they won't just be broke. They will be exactly what they tried to make me nothing. V, Rowan said, using her nickname for me. I sound like a forensic accountant who just found the second set of books, I said, and I am going to balance them, permanently. I drove into the night. My phone buzzed again with a text from my mother. Probably another lie, another threat, another plea. I didn't even look at it. The time for talking was over. The time for liquidation had begun. The sun rose over Savannah, casting a sharp, unforgiving light on the city, but by 8 a.m, I was already 300 miles away. I had taken the first flight back to our headquarters in Charlotte. I needed to be on my own ground. I needed the home court advantage. Luminart Compliance Group occupied the 34th floor of a glass and steel tower that looked down on the banking district. It was a fortress of transparency. The walls were glass, the floors were polished concrete, and the air smelled of ozone and expensive espresso. This was the world I had built. Here, I was not the unwanted daughter or the spare part. Here, I was the managing partner. At 9:15 a.m, my assistant, David, buzzed my intercom. His voice was hesitant. "Violet," David said, "there are 2 people in the lobby asking for you, Mr. and Mrs. Fisher. They say they are your parents. They do not have an appointment, but they are insistent. They are causing a bit of a disturbance with the security desk." I adjusted the cuffs of my silk blouse. I looked at my reflection in the monitor of my computer. I looked tired, but my eyes were clear. "Send them up, David," I said. "And please ask Sarah from legal to join us in conference room B. Tell her to bring a notepad and a recording device." "Legal?" David asked, surprised. "For your parents?" "For a hostile negotiation," I corrected him. "Yes." 5 minutes later, I walked into conference room B. It was my favorite room. It was small, soundproof, and had a single table made of reclaimed wood. There was nowhere to hide. Marianne and Calvin Fisher were already there. They looked like refugees from a sunken ship. My mother was wearing large sunglasses, likely to hide swollen eyes, and a coat that looked slept in. My father, usually the picture of country club arrogance, looked shrunken. His shoulders were hunched, and his face was a map of anxiety. When I entered, Marianne stood up immediately. She took off her sunglasses, revealing red, puffy rims. She reached out her hands, her palms up, in a gesture of pleading. "Violet," she said, her voice trembling. "Thank God. We drove all night. We have been calling you for hours." I did not take her hands. I walked to the head of the table and stood behind the chair. I did not sit. "Hello, Mother. Hello, Father," I said. My voice was level. "This is Sarah, our general counsel. She will be sitting in to witness this conversation and take minutes." Sarah, a sharp woman in her 40s with a terrifying intellect, nodded politely from the corner. She placed a digital recorder on the table and pressed a button. A small red light blinked into existence. Calvin bristled. "Witness recording Violet. We are your parents. We are here to talk about family matters. This is private." "Nothing is private anymore," I said. "You made sure of that when you stole my identity and slandered me in front of 300 people last night. If you want to talk, you talk to the record. If not, security will escort you out." Calvin looked at the recorder, then at me. He looked like he wanted to scream. But the setting, the corporate art, the skyline view, the lawyer in the corner neutered him. He sat down heavily. Marianne decided to try the tactic that had worked for her for 20 years. She softened. Her face crumpled into a look of tragic martyrdom. "Violet," she said, her voice dropping to a sweet, wounded whisper. "Why are you doing this? Is it to punish us? Did you ruin your sister's wedding just to feel powerful? Did you do it to gloat?" It was a trap. If I got angry, if I defended myself emotionally, she won. She would turn it into a conversation about my feelings, my bitterness, my instability. I looked at her with the detachment of a surgeon looking at a tumor. No, I said. I did not do it to gloat, and I did not do it to punish you. I pulled out a chair and sat down, keeping my posture rigid. I did it, I continued, because I am finished being the trash can for this family's mistakes. You have spent a decade dumping your guilt, your debts, and your lies onto me. You convinced yourselves that I was the broken one, so you would not have to look at the cracks in your own foundation. I simply returned the trash to its owners. We gave you everything, Calvin snapped, slamming his hand on the table. The sound echoed, but Sarah didn't even blink. We raised you, we fed you, and you repay us by destroying your sister's life. Graham has locked her out of the house. He is talking about annulment. He is talking about fraud charges. You have destroyed this family. I am destroying the family, I asked. I picked up a file folder I had brought with me. That is an interesting perspective, Calvin, because according to the timeline, the destruction started 17 years ago. I slid the folder across the table. It hit the wood with a heavy thud. Open it, I said. Calvin stared at the folder. He didn't move. Go ahead, I urged. It is from Derek Morrow. He sends his regards. At the mention of Derek's name, Marianne went pale. She looked at the folder as if it contained anthrax. Her hand shook as she reached out and flipped it open. The first page was a high-resolution copy of my grandmother's trust deed. The second page was the affidavit Marianne had signed, claiming I was a drug addict to liquidate the funds. Marianne made a sound like a dying animal. She covered her mouth with her hand. Eleanor left me $80,000, I said. In 2005, invested in a standard index fund. That money would be worth over $300,000 today, maybe more. I looked at my father. You told me she died broke. You told me there was no money for college. You told me I had to be independent. I leaned forward. You stole from a dead woman, I said. And you framed a teenage girl as a junkie to do it. That is not just bad parenting. Calvin, that is a felony. That is embezzlement of trust funds. And unlike the identity theft with the car loan, the statute of limitations on trust fraud involving a minor is very, very long. Calvin looked at the document. He couldn't look at me. He was deflating before my eyes. The bluster, the arrogance, the fatherly authority, it was all gone. He was just a thief in a suit. We needed it, Calvin whispered. The business was in trouble. The market crashed in 2008. We were going to lose the house. We were going to lose everything. So you sacrificed me to save the house, I said. And then you used the leftover money to buy Sloane a degree she didn't earn and a car she couldn't afford. Sloane needed help, Marianne cried out. She is not like you. Violet, you are strong. You have always been hard. You could survive anything. Sloane is soft. She breaks easily. We had to protect her. You didn't protect her, I said. You crippled her. You taught her that consequences are for other people. You taught her that if she cries loud enough, someone will write a check, and now she is standing in the wreckage of her own life because she never learned how to hold a shovel. Marianne wiped her eyes. She reached across the table. Trying to grab my hand, I pulled back. Violet, please, she begged. We can fix this. We can make it right. But you have to help us. You have to help Sloane. Help her how? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Talk to Graham, Marianne said, her eyes wide and desperate. He respects you. He is afraid of you. If you tell him that the audit was a mistake, if you tell him that the discrepancies were just clerical errors, if you tell him that you gave Sloane permission to use your name for the car. She took a breath, gaining speed. We can say it was a family arrangement. We can say we had a verbal agreement about the credit history and the transcript. We can buy time. We can say the university lost the records, just until the wedding blows over, just until he calms down. Please, Violet, he is going to leave her. He is going to ruin us. I looked at Sarah in the corner. She was writing furiously on her notepad, her face a mask of professional disbelief. I looked back at my parents. They were asking me to commit perjury. They were asking me to risk my license, my firm, and my reputation to patch up the hole in their sinking ship. They were asking me to lie for the sister who had stomped on my phone and the mother who had called me a failure. "You want me to lie," I said. "We want you to have mercy," Calvin said. "We are your blood." "I am an auditor," I said. "My job is to find the truth. My job is to ensure that the numbers balance." I stood up. I walked to the window and looked out at the city. "I do not fix lies," I said, my back to them. "I fix systems, and this system, this family is corrupt to the core. I will not inject more lies into it to keep it on life support." I turned around. "Here is the offer," I said. I signaled to Sarah. She opened her briefcase and pulled out a document I had drafted on the plane. She slid it across the table to them. "This is a repayment agreement," I said. "You are going to pay me back the full value of the trust you stole, plus interest calculated at the average market rate for the last 9 years. You are going to pay me back for the tax fraud you committed in my name, and you are going to pay off the car loan you took out in my name immediately." Calvin looked at the number at the bottom of the page. His eyes bulged. "This is nearly $500,000, he stammered. "We don't have this kind of liquid cash. Violet, the business is things are tight." "Sell the house," I said. "Sell the cars. Sell the jewelry. I do not care. You found the money to send Sloan to a fake college. You will find the money to pay your debts." "And if we don't?" Marianne asked, her voice turning hard again. "If you don't sign that paper before you leave this room," I said, "I will file a formal police report regarding the theft of the trust fund. I will submit the full evidence package to the IRS regarding your tax returns. And I will provide a sworn affidavit to Graham Kessler's legal team confirming that I never authorized the use of my credit, which will ensure his annulment goes through and Sloan faces potential criminal charges for identity theft." The room was silent. The air conditioner hummed. Marianne looked at Calvin. Calvin looked at his hands. They were cornered. For the first time in their lives. There was no rug to sweep the dirt under. There was only the cold, hard floor. "And one more thing," I said. I pointed to the second clause in the contract. "A cease and desist," I said. "You will never speak about me in public again. You will never contact me again. You will never come to my office, my home, or my wife's hospital. You will acknowledge in writing that the statements you made about my mental health were false. If I hear a whisper, a single whisper that you are spreading lies about me, I will trigger the penalty clause, which involves releasing the audio recordings of our kitchen conversations to every social circle in Briar Glen." Marianne looked at me with pure hatred. "You are cruel." "I am independent," I corrected her. "You taught me that. You said handouts make people weak. Well, I am not giving you a handout. I am giving you a bill." Calvin picked up the pen. His hand was shaking so badly he could barely hold it. He looked at the document. He looked at the ruin of his reputation if he refused. He signed. He pushed the paper to Marianne. She cried as she signed it. She cried not because she was sorry, but because she was losing. She signed her name, dropping a tear onto the paper, leaving a small, wet smear next to her signature. Sarah stepped forward and collected the document. She notarized it on the spot with her stamp. Thump, thump. The sound was like a gavel coming down. "You have 30 days to wire the funds," I said. "The account details are in the packet. After that, I expect never to see your faces again." Marianne stood up. She gathered her coat around her like armor. She looked at me one last time. "You won," she said bitterly. "I hope it keeps you warm at night." "It does," I said. "Buying your own heat is much more reliable than waiting for someone else to light a fire for you." They walked out. They didn't look back. They looked smaller than they had when they entered. They looked like two people who had just realized that the bill had finally come due, and they had spent their last dime on a facade that had just collapsed. I stood in the conference room for a long time after they left. Sarah turned off the recorder. "Do you want me to file this?" Sarah asked gently. Yes, I said. File it under resolved. I looked out the window again. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't joy. It wasn't triumph. It was something quieter, deeper. It was the feeling of a heavy pack being lifted off my shoulders after a 10-mile hike. I had not just won the money. I had won my name back. I had won my history back. I had taken the narrative they had written for me, the sad, broken, unstable daughter, and I had shredded it in a paper shredder. I picked up my phone and texted Rowan. It is done. They signed. A moment later, 3 dots appeared, then a reply. Come home. I made lasagna. I smiled. It was a small, real smile. I walked out of the conference room, leaving the empty chairs and the silence behind me. I had a business to run. I had a wife to go home to. And for the first time in my life, I had a bank account that reflected my actual worth. In every sense of the word, the audit was complete, the books were balanced, and I was finally, truly, in the black. The fallout from the wedding at the Oglethorpe Hotel did not result in a dramatic reconciliation or a screaming match in the rain. Real life, especially when lawyers are involved, is much colder and much more efficient. Graham Kessler did not cancel the wedding to vindicate me. He did not do it because he suddenly developed a conscience about my childhood trauma. He did it because he was a businessman who realized he had merged his assets with a liability, and he cut his losses with the ruthlessness of a corporate raider. The annulment was filed 48 hours after I walked out of the ballroom. The grounds were fraud. It was not a difficult case to make. When the Kessler family security team finally did the deep dive, they should have done a year prior. The facade of Sloan Fisher disintegrated like wet paper. They found everything. They found the fabricated transcripts. They found the credit card statements with my name on them. They found the emails between Sloan and my mother discussing how to edit PDF files to make her bank statements look more robust. Sloan was not just exposed as a liar. She was exposed as a security risk. The Kessler family, terrified of the blowback on their logistics contracts that I had flagged, scrubbed her from their lives with terrifying speed. There was no settlement. There was no alimony. There was just a non-disclosure agreement and a one-way ticket back to Pennsylvania for Marianne and Calvin. The destruction was slower but arguably more painful. Briar Glen is a small town. It is the kind of place where reputation is the only currency that matters. And thanks to the efficiency of the grapevine, their currency was now worthless. I never released the recordings to the public. I did not have to. The guests at the wedding had heard enough. The story of the mule comment and the stolen trust fund traveled from Savannah to Pennsylvania faster than a flight. The neighbors who used to look at my parents with envy now looked at them with a mixture of disgust and morbid curiosity. They were no longer the parents of the golden child and the difficult rebel. They were the parents who had cannibalized one daughter to feed the delusions of the other. They had to sell the lake house to pay me. That was the most public humiliation of all. A for sale sign on the crown jewel of their assets was a billboard announcing their defeat. I was told by Derek Morrow that when they went to the grocery store, people would turn their carts down other aisles to avoid speaking to them. They were not in prison, but they were in a prison of their own, making a social isolation that no amount of money could fix. 30 days after the confrontation in the conference room, my phone buzzed with a notification from my bank. It was a wire transfer. The amount was $482,000.63. It was the principal of my grandmother's trust, plus the interest, plus the repayment for the car loan, plus the tax penalties they had forced me to incur. I sat at my desk at Luminark and stared at the screen. I expected to feel a surge of triumph. I expected to feel like pumping my fist in the air. Instead, I felt a quiet, heavy settling in my chest. It was the feeling of a foundation finally being poured into a hole that had been empty for a decade. I did not see the money as a prize. I saw it as restitution. It was the back pay for every shift I worked at the diner while my sister slept in. It was the reimbursement for every textbook I photocopied because I could not afford to buy it. It was the apology they would never say out loud, translated into the only language they truly understood. I transferred the money into a high-yield savings account. I did not buy a car. I did not buy a vacation. I did not change my lifestyle at all. The money was not for spending. It was for safety. It was a concrete wall between me and the world that had tried to crush me. That afternoon, I had Sarah, our legal counsel, send the final document. It was a formal notice of no contact. It stated that the debt was settled, the contract was fulfilled, and that any attempt by Marianne, Calvin, or Sloan to contact me would be considered a breach of our agreement and would result in immediate legal action. I signed it with a steady hand. I did not write a personal note. There was nothing left to say. I had audited the relationship, found it insolvent, and liquidated the assets. The account was closed. When I got home that evening, the house was quiet. The smell of roasted garlic and tomatoes filled the air. Rowan was in the kitchen, wearing sweatpants and a t-shirt, stirring a pot of sauce. She looked up when I walked in. She did not ask if I won. She did not ask if they were sorry. She just looked at my face, read the relief in my eyes, and smiled. "It is done," she asked. "It is done," I said. I walked over to her and wrapped my arms around her waist, burying my face in her neck. I breathed in the scent of her soap, basil, and safety. We stood there for a long time, the sauce bubbling gently on the stove. This was the victory. It was not the scene in the ballroom. It was not the money in the bank. It was this. It was standing in a kitchen that I owned, with a person who loved me for who I was, not for what I could provide. I realized then that I had spent my entire life trying to prove I was independent. But independence is not just about paying your own bills. It is about choosing who you let into your life. It is about building a family that does not subtract from you. A few months later, I used a portion of the settlement to establish a foundation. I called it the Eleanor Vance Independence Fund. It was not a massive charity. It was a targeted scholarship for students who had been cut off by their families' kids who were told to figure it out without a safety net. We did not just give them tuition checks, we gave them mentors. We gave them financial literacy courses. We gave them the ledger I never had. I interviewed the first recipient myself. She was a 19-year-old girl who had been kicked out for coming out to her parents. She was working 2 jobs and sleeping on a friend's couch, trying to finish her engineering degree. She sat in my office, clutching her backpack, looking at me with the same terrified, defiant eyes I used to see in the mirror. "I do not want charity," she told me, her chin high. "I can do it myself." "I know you can," I said, sliding the scholarship offer across the desk. "This isn't charity, it is a tool. You can dig the hole with your hands, or you can use a shovel. I am just giving you the shovel." She looked at the paper, and then she looked at me. And for the first time, she cried. I didn't hug her. I didn't tell her it would be okay. I told her the truth. I told her it would be hard, but that she was going to win because she had something her parents didn't. She had the truth. I never got an apology from my parents. Sloan never wrote to say she was sorry. For a long time. I thought I needed that. I thought the story wouldn't be over until they admitted they were wrong. But standing there in my office, watching that young girl walk out with a future that was fully funded, I realized I didn't need their apology to breathe. Their silence was not a weapon anymore. It was just silence. I am not the piece of the puzzle that didn't fit. I was never the wrong shape. I was just in the wrong puzzle. My life now is not a reaction to them. It is not a revenge plot. It is a creation. I have framed my own world with boundaries that are made of steel and love that is made of choice. I have Rowan. I have my work. I have the legacy of my grandmother. And I have the absolute, unshakable knowledge that I can walk into any room, face any audit, and come out clean. My name is Violet Fisher. I am a forensic accountant. I am a wife. I am a survivor. And for the first time in 26 years, when I look at the ledger of my life, everything balances perfectly. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to hear from you in the comments. Let me know where you are tuning in from and what you would have done if you were in my shoes. Please do not forget to subscribe to Kate Revenge Stories. like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story reach more people who might need to hear it.